Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I'm a business psychologist, army veteran and everyday adventurer. I will be sharing my conversations with some truly incredible guests who are weaving adventure into their daily lives. And I really hope these conversations inspire you to undertake your own everyday adventures too. So today I am really excited to welcome Caroline Poole to the show. So if you haven't heard of Caroline, I'm sure you'll be looking up her books straight after this. So Caroline is an author, she's an adventuress, she's a surfer, she's a pilot, she's a former firefighter. I didn't quite know exactly what to include in the list because she's got so many amazing hobbies that I think would be so relevant. But she's published 7 books, including Fighting Fire, The Gutsy Girl, and her most recent book, Tough Broad, which is an exploration into the science and psychology of the outdoors and our place in it as we age. I came across Caroline's work on Instagram and I was immediately sort of digging around trying to find more about her work, thinking, how have I not come across her work beforehand? And reached out to her and she was generous enough to agree to come on the podcast. I think there are so many themes in her work that align so closely to everything we talk about here, whether it's how to keep adventuring as you age, as you grow, as you develop, the links between adventure and our own psychology and our emotional resilience, how pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone enables us to grow and to develop confidence in ourselves as well. So I'm sure we'll touch on all of these and more. But Caroline, thank you so much for joining me. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
So I suppose my first question, and I guess anybody who knows anything about your work will probably sort of have an understanding of the answer to this. But just I'd love to know where the inspiration to write this particular book around adventure and aging and all the brilliant women you speak to and interview and share their stories of during the book. Where did that sort of idea, I suppose, start or come from?
Well, I was on my surfboard, honestly, in winter surf, and I'm not a very good surfer, but I'm a good paddler. And there were a lot of men out there my age and older, but there weren't any women. And I knew there was a ton of women who surf better than me. And also the same happens when I'm on my electric skateboard. The same happens when I'm flying my experimental planes. I see men my age, but no women. And I was 55 and kind of looking around and wondering what my own aging journey was going to look like. And I wanted to keep adventure in my life because, as you said, I've been in the outdoors, pushing my comfort zone, since I was small, really. And I thought I was my best self. And so this book is really a quest to figure out my own fulfilling aging. I thought outdoor adventure had something to do with it, but I also wondered if there was some information that I had that was telling me that, hey, you know what, time to give it up, because clearly other women had.
That's so interesting, isn't it? That's this idea, and it's certainly something I think, that struck a chord with me, this idea of wanting to look around and seeing other people who, either same age or other women who are out there doing it, and how inspiring it is when you see, other people who look like you, whatever your age, color, gender, background. But when you see that reflected in the people also participating, it makes you feel, I guess, a sense of belonging as well, and a sense of actually, I've got a space here and I am able to take it up. And actually, when you stop noticing that, how you start to question your place, potentially, like you said, your place in the lineup, your place, in a community in general.
I don't know that I was probably not gonna give it up, but I just wanted to know what other people like, where's the party that I'm not invited to, kind of thing. And, then of course, so I this book is not a book of profiles of women who are incredibly adventurous, and they are in this book, but it's really about fulfilling aging. So it's about the science behind and the psychology behind it. So I think that's one of the misnomers about the book. They think they're just going to read adventure stories, and you will. But I was very interested in what is this mindset that is stopping women from being outside. And, when I started the book, the pandemic was not yet here. And I made all these plans to interview women about why they were outside. I didn't have a real specific plan. And then the pandemic hit. So I had to sit inside, and I did a lot of research on what fulfilling aging really was. And then I turned out when I went out finally to do the interviews after the lockdown lifted, that I had a much better grasp of this journey.
Hmm. I was just wondering when you were doing that research, or I guess when you came to then combine it with the stories of the women you met and you spoke to, um, was there something that was really, I mean, what was the sort of thing that struck you that you hadn't realized, or that, because I think there is a lot, obviously, the research around connections in the outdoors and how much it can bring to us in a general sense in terms of our well-being, in terms of resilience. I mean, it is just, again, skyrocketed, I think, particularly as a result of the pandemic. And a lot more is known about it and is talked about. But I think there are still some aspects and things that struck me when I was reading the book that I was like, okay, so that's really interesting. And I was just wondering if there was a piece of research or a story that struck you, thought, actually, that I hadn't thought about it from that angle before.
Well, I was well aware that the messaging around our aging as women is toxic, and that we are being told very specific things, that we're going to be frail, we have to watch out for breaking bones, that we're on a cognitive decline, and that inevitably we should narrow our lives to protect ourselves. And the men weren't getting that message because they were out there with me in that, big swell, or out there up in the air. And so this book has a lot of science that is backed up, but I felt like I did not need to do science on this. Like every time I mention like the toxic aging messaging, every woman like over 50 for sure, but 40, maybe even 30, they nod. Like, I don't do any science on that. That's proven. We all know it. So, but what really surprised me was the science I found around mindset and aging, which is basically that the way we look at our own aging predicts how well we age. So if you have a negative view of your own aging, you will have a higher chance of a cardiac event earlier, and cognitive decline earlier. And the opposite is true. If you feel like your aging is a time of exploration and exhilaration, you're happier, healthier, and you live 7.5 years longer. That's huge. Oh, and they did a study that is not in the book, but in 2022 they did a study of 14,000 people, I think, over the age of 50, and found that those with a positive view of their own aging had a 43% less chance of no health issues in the next 4 years. None. 43. So obviously, this is all really important. You have to have a positive mindset. But then the obvious question was, how? How do you get a positive mindset in the face of such toxic messaging? And again, we all know what it is. It's so insidious. It's so subliminal. It's everywhere. I see it in my friends. They were very disheartened about their aging journey, and everything was blamed on age. My aches, my pains. I can't do that. I can't try that. And so the question was, how do you get it? And I had a feeling that the link was outdoor adventure. And in fact, it was.
When I read that in the book, I just thought that was so fascinating, just because I think, one, there's that bit about how we tend to treat our bodies and our minds as so separate. So much of the research looking into aging or diseases that occur as a result of aging, they're all very much body focused. They're medicalized, which is obviously necessary when thinking about, interventions, and when you think about it from that perspective. But I think, we know there is such a connection in the end between the way in which our brains operate and the impact on our bodies. And that's not to say you can just think yourself out of ill health, but that fact that actually, like you said, that connection between what is going on for ourselves internally and externally is something that I think we don't fully understand. And I just thought it was really interesting that there was research, one, to support that. And then when you tie that to the stories that you hear about, I think that's something that struck me reading the stories in your book was the sort of, in a way, the agelessness of the people who are participating in the adventures that they were taking part in, that they were conscious of their age, but also why it was the sort of, why not? Why shouldn't I be able to do this at this point? Why shouldn't I be able to try it, rather than coming at it from age first? I am this age, and therefore I do something that is appropriate to that.
Right. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. It was clear to me that there's certain attributes that are sort of reserved for youth. And if you try to embrace them, like a little bit of recklessness, having fun, play, like all that is cordoned off for adults, I think, especially women, especially as we age. And so sort of reclaiming those feelings of fun and bravery is makes people kind of sit up and look at you, and you're basically, and this is where the power really came in going outside, is when you go outside, what nature asks of you upends all that messaging that not only other people are putting on you, but you believe yourself. So when you go outside, you can't really feel that frail, and you can't really feel that, cognitively impaired, because you're always sort of dealing with the weather, or the hill was steeper than you thought, or you forgot coffee, or you are learning something new. And all that flies in the face of this messaging. That's where I found the power of going outside. It simply was a direct rebuke to what we're told about what we should expect. So when you upend your own expectations of yourself, there's a lot of power in that.
So powerful. I think one of the brilliant things as well of just, I was thinking that so much of our day-to-day lives is reflected back to us physically, in terms of, you take photos, or there's a mirror, or you're supposed to look a certain way or behave a certain way. And there's this whole point about how, as you get older, you're supposed to sort of try and recapture your youth somehow, whether it's, trying to look like you still did 20 years ago, or that there's some sort of shame around that. And I think it's really interesting linked to that with being outdoors. I know when I'm out surfing or whatever, it's only if I come in and look in the mirror and I go, oh no, I do not look like I did in my head when I was on that wave. Somehow when I was out there, you are caught in the moment, and you're not thinking, this is how I look, because like you said, you're caught up in the elements. You're trying not to get, drowned by the wave, or you're trying to work out where the trail is and all of those sort of things. It's only when you retreat back into that sort of the indoors world that it suddenly becomes oh, okay, I look like a complete sandy mess. I probably should do something about this. And your age that those narratives around your age can start to resurface as well. So I think
I do want to say that these women were not ageless, in that they were actually embracing this stage in their life where they were still physically healthy in certain ways. I mean, I interviewed a wide variety of women of different fitnesses and physical situations, and they had a sense of themselves, and they just didn't care as much. I interviewed Vijaya Srivastava, who learned to swim at 68. And I asked her if being older was a hindrance to learning to swim. I mean, swimming is one of those psychological things that, it triggers all those deep existential fears of drowning. And yet she went out and she did this because her doctor basically prescribed exercise for her. And she had never done anything outdoors before. And when I asked her how age influenced this new learning journey of hers, she said it actually helped, because she didn't care what she looked like in her bathing suit. She knew she wasn't going to be a great swimmer. And there was this urgency of, she's not going to get a second chance to do this again. And I feel like it wasn't about trying not to be your age. It was just simply redefining what you could or could not do at that age.
I think there was a really interesting I think it was quite near the beginning of the book, where you said a woman growing old is the most boring movie ever, in terms of, how that narrative is portrayed, how we're supposed to age or disappear gracefully in a certain way. And I think, a lot of the stories felt like they were a sort of direct rebuke to that. Not that I'm trying to push myself into the world in terms of everyone look at me, but actually I'm going to like you said, alongside the aging process, and in spite of it, continue to find a way to navigate that.
Not in spite, like because of almost,
Mm.
because, what really, really surprised me is I was 57, 58 when I was writing this. And the women who were older than me that I asked, they all said the 60s was their favorite decade, which is eye-opening because that is not what we're told. We're really told to look back at our gilded youth and mourn that's gone. But in fact, we're at this incredible stage now, as I was saying, not just emotionally and experientially, but also physiologically, because post-menopause, all those caregiving hormones that have been employed throughout our life or after puberty in taking care of other people, our children, our partners, have changed. They've ebbed. They've changed. And it's not that we are not empathetic anymore, but just we're turning that empathy onto ourselves more. And we start asking, what about me? What let's care for me now. And I think that's great for the people around you. Like that's an amazing opportunity. And also almost because of this lack of identity that we are given, or this invisibility, this fading away that you're talking about, this is an opportunity too, because, invisibility is a superpower to some degree. Like now you can redefine yourself. So it's really a pity that we have sort of subtly told women this is a terrible time of life, because it's actually kind of an amazing time of life. And over again, women told me that. Yes, for sure. At some point, the aging journey gets super difficult. But until then, let's take full advantage.
I mean, I guess it sort of leads me to my next question, really, which is around, again, as you were hearing these stories, as you were carrying out the research, what did you hear that, I mean, I think you've just alluded to it partly, but was there something that really captured you and inspired you and made you think, actually, I hadn't thought about either adventure or sort of aging and adventure together connected in this way before, and that somehow motivated or inspired me to try something or think about things differently?
Well, I had this sense that outdoor adventure was good for me because, again, I liked who I was in the outdoors and I didn't really want to give it up, but I couldn't really explain it to anybody. And once I sat down and really started deeply researching fulfilling aging, I got a sense of, first of all, what we need to keep in our life, which tends to fall away. Like everybody needs this, but it tends to fall away as we age. So we have to be vigilant to keep community in our life, to keep purpose in our life, to keep clearly health in our life and novelty in our life. And then finally, also this positive view on our own aging. So those 5 pillars of healthy aging, you can actually get the moment you step outside. That's the unique thing, I think, about going outside. There's this, clearly the health aspect. I mean, yes, you can exercise in a gym, but going outside, they have shown on a biological level is so much better for your overall biology and your emotional well-being. So the research really astounded me. I found that, things like the tree chemicals are really important for your inflammation markers. Birdsong calms your brain, which is really important for memory and cognition. They've shown, and also, also just the quiet of outside, they've shown that people who take a walk outside test much better on cognitive memory tests when they come back in. And that's because the brain has been rested. Doesn't have to filter out those hard urban noises. And that's a lot of work that we're doing constantly. So people who have been outside have less anxiety and depression. So on this health level, on this holistic health level, going outside is important. So people say to me, well, I go to the gym. That's great. You should go to the gym. I love it. I go to the gym too. But you're not necessarily getting maybe the community, or often people get the community, but you're not necessarily getting the novelty. You're definitely not getting all those health benefits, those extra health benefits. People say, I joined a book club. That's amazing. You have to do that because that's great for community and for novelty, but you're not getting the health aspect. When you go outside and pick an activity, you are often hitting all those in a really powerful, powerful way.
It's like multiple touch points, I suppose, or like you said, that you can get all of those elements in different ways, but that this is it's almost an accelerated. It reminds me of, the reason I love taking my clients outdoors and when I'm working with them, because it almost acts as this sort of accelerated one-stop shop of hitting
Mm-hmm.
all of these different things that you're talking about in terms of, like you said, the community and the connections you make that somehow can feel less encumbered, I think, sometimes when you're walking alongside somebody, or when you're doing an activity alongside someone, rather than that, the intensity sometimes that comes in internally that I know people can relate to. And I think so from a community aspect it can be huge. But yeah, I can really relate to all of those points. I was just thinking about going back to that point you made around play, because I think that's such an underestimated aspect of being a human, in fact, and like you said, how it gets discounted, that in a way children are encouraged to play and we go, well, that's how their brains develop, through play. It sort of gets knocked out of them sometimes through the schooling system, or you've got to sit down and be rigid and sit still. But this idea that actually our brains remain plastic as we continued, I think that's something you touch on as well.
Yeah, I interviewed these boogie boarders down in San Diego. They were between the ages of 60 and the oldest was 97 actually. And they were boogie boarding, which is probably most of your listeners know what it is. But for those of you who don't, it's a very simple sport, which is why I was interested in it, because it was something that you could learn at a late stage. And it was also, really easy on your body because, as these women did, you can just play in the whitewater. But what really surprised me about it, so I went in to most of these adventures with an idea of where it would fit in my sort of fulfilling aging paradigm, and came out often with really surprised at how it had opened up my own mind about new aspects of that. And what I saw with these boogie boarders, because boogie boarding was so simple, that they really were engaging in this pure play, which they've done a lot of research on play. In this case, it was probably, there's lots of kinds of play: social play, object play, rough and tumble play, which is kind of what boogie boarding was. And it is a way that people bond. It's the way that you learn a lot about yourself and your limits, and also what you can and cannot, what you can do too. And I think I spoke in particular to Lorraine Voigt, who was 60 when she saw these boogie boarders in the water having what looked like a lot of fun. And she didn't have an outdoor life at all, but it was a pandemic. So I think you're kind of more willing to do things at these weird times in your life. And she thought, why don't I just try it? And she was hooked from the very first session. But what she told me was, she liked all the physical aspects about it, about being in the ocean, about catching a wave and feeling like you're going really fast. But what really surprised her was how much the community aspect meant to her, because she started to go boogie boarding on her own. She realized it wasn't quite as fun as when she did it with all these women. And I think to go outside is a medium for all of us of many different social skills, because it provides the environment where you're bonding with someone without having to, having to be suave in terms of, chit chat. You're there sharing a wave, for instance. And that was really empowering for Lorraine. She told me that she actually, well, the other thing she said is, and which shocked me because I always looked down a little bit on boogie boarding as a surfer, mostly because it was simple.
Yes, no,
right.
I'm totally with you. Yeah.
But it's that very simplicity that makes it so beautiful.
Yeah.
And she said, boogie boarding changed my life. And I thought, really? How? And she said, basically, a lot of times it's hard to explain, but basically what she told me is that look at this big Pacific Ocean. It's cold, it's windy out today. The waves are tumbling me around. I'm, watching out for my fellow boogie boarders here. Like, I am not frail. I am not boring. I am not cognitively and, on decline, just like basically she had been told. She had basically upended her own expectations of herself. And that power meant that she actually, in her non-wetsuit life, was trying to explore new ways of being also. So she was challenging her fear of heights, she told me, and she was a lot more social. She was saying yes to social outings because, again, she thought, well, if I can boogie board, what else can I do?
Yeah, it's so powerful. It reminds me, I don't live very far from the sea at all, and there's a group of women, I think they must be in their sort of mid 60s, and a man, in fact. So I shouldn't just say it's just a group of women. There's a group who started sea swimming, and then last year they took up boogie boarding. And I just remember going down to the beach, I'd be walking the dogs, and they were just having literally the best time. And all you
Yeah.
wanted to do was run into the water and join them because they just looked like they were having so much fun. Um,
I
but
do
I
think play is really liberating for women in particular because, and I write about this in the book, we're so girdled as we become adults. Well, first as teenagers, we're just watched a lot and judged about our mothering skills, our femininity, our ability to be nice. I mean, we're constantly being assessed. And I think play is defined as this sort of purposeless activity simply for the joy of whatever that is. There's a timelessness to it, and there's an unself consciousness about it. And it's really important for women. And it can really unlock something. And when you're in your 60s, you're sort of ready for that because, again, you don't care as much about what other people think.
and I was just thinking there's so few opportunities without searching for it as well, that actually, particularly I think that was partly when I go back to sort of, I suppose one of the reasons for starting this podcast as well is that actually, you know, uh, what I love in the book is how many different activities you touch on, and also this point about actually the activity doesn't have to be for you just because it's that exploring. There are different things that you can try. I think you talked about swimming, and actually someone learning to swim, actually they may not carry on with swimming. You might try, I've tried so many activities over the year, and I'm like, yeah, that's all right, I enjoy that's the thing that really resonates with me. But I think there's something about having the opportunity, but also feeling that permission to go and search it out and feel that that is something that is important, that you can prioritize that. I think particularly as women, that can be quite hard of going, actually, I really need this really matters. And it may look silly and frivolous, or, I should be doing something for other people or more important, or it's, taking time out from the family or whatever it is. But that actually, that's the bit that allows you to feel whole sometimes. And I think that really connected with what you were saying, just, and going back to just, that sheer idea of just play and purposelessness and just doing it for the joy of it is so important. So having written this wonderful book, and and I know it can be a really big thing to get the book out there and all the publicity, so not wanting to push you into your next step, but I'm just wondering, having done this research, having had these conversations, whether you've got a sense of, actually, this is something I would like to take forward. What are the next steps for you? How would this open up?
Well, I mean, I went on a lot of different adventures. So I went scuba diving with an 80-year-old, and I also went bird watching with someone in a wheelchair. And I went sea kayaking, and I learned to fly a gyrocopter. So it was a wide range. And initially, the reason for going bird watching, for instance, was so that I could urge people to go outside because, again, I knew that just going outside was simply medicinal on a biological level. And I went bird watching with Virginia Rose, who's been in a wheelchair since she was 14. And my idea was that it was about, I think a lot of women say they can't do something because of some limitation. And I wanted to show that if Virginia Rose can be in a wheelchair and go bird watching, then most of us can find something to get us outside. And but what I really but I also didn't really think it was an adventure. There was that as kind of like, this isn't really what I would call an adventure, but I'm going to include it anyway so that some people who maybe wouldn't scuba dive will, get the medicinal benefits. And what I found was bird watching is an adventure. It has all the hallmarks of adventure, has all the rhythms. It has that, anticipation of seeing a bird. It has the quest, because there we are trying to find birds. It has the exhilaration when you see a bird. And we were actually on a bird-a-thon. So she wheeled and I walked 6 miles. So there was that physical vitality. And I was learning new things, so that everything about it was an adventure. What I really saw was that it isn't actually the activity that defines the adventure. It's how you feel doing it. So if you are accessing your exploratory side and your exhilaration and feeling physically vital and pushing comfort zones, you're on an adventure. So I've widened my own view of what can really captivate me. And I also did a lot of research on awe, that concept of awe, which it turns out is really important for us as humans to feel awe, and is really easy to access when you go outside. And I hadn't realized that really a lot of the reasons I was going outside was to feel awe. I just couldn't I really honestly had no word for that until I was halfway through this book. And I did a lot of research on awe and found that, first of all, the definition of awe is that feeling of sort of fear and wonder and dread in the presence of something bigger than us. And it's really good for us because not only does it do things like lower our cortisol and inflammation markers, but it lowers our anxiety and it lowers our depression. Two things that happen when we age that are things we have to really watch out for. So they've done studies on awe, and you don't have to. The way I found my own awe, as you know, is by climbing up on the wing of a plane, because I was interested in how a one-time adventure would change us neurally, maybe, or at least confidence-wise. And so I did something called wing walking. It's on the cover of the book. That's me on the top of the plane. And what I realized after was that I was feeling some adrenaline, of course, because you had clambered on a wing at 3,000 feet. But really what I mostly felt was awe. And that luckily you do not have to climb on a wing in order to feel awe. You can simply go walking.
Yes. Yeah.
They had a great study here in San Francisco, actually, where they asked people between the ages of 60 and 80 to go on what they called awe walks, where they simply instructed to have them look at things with fresh childlike eyes. So they could, what they called, cultivate awe. So we can cultivate awe in us every time we go outside by just looking at things with wonder, being very present. And they followed these people for 8 weeks, and they found that their inflammation markers went down. They self-reported significantly lower depression and anxiety. And the really cool thing was that they self-reported higher rates of gratitude and compassion, which is powerful and we all need in our life.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I mean, it really resonated with me, thinking back to where the whole idea around everyday adventures came from for me as well, which was, that thing of actually how do children look at the world, and seeing it in my own kids, actually, that they found endless fascination in grubbing around in the dirt, quite frankly, and delaying me on walks, looking at things. I was just like, come on, please, we're going to be late. And actually going on a sec, they're on an adventure right now. And that, like you said, that stopping and pausing and just noticing, I know now if I'm ever feeling sort of really stressed, or, I'm head down in emails and think, oh, actually, I really need a break from this, I'll just go and stand and look at a hedge. And immediately you'll see the bees start coming out, you see little insects crawling, and suddenly you're in a completely different world and you're transported. So that whole part, I mean, I absolutely loved the section on awe. I loved also that the way in which, because I think similar to you, I'd always sort of thought, oh, do I love these things because, sort of talked about being an adrenaline junkie, or you love the rush or whatever. But actually, like you said, there's something about the environment so that is such a fundamental part of the experience, and that you can capture that in so many ways. It doesn't have to be that, like I said, thankfully on the wing. It has to be said, when I read that bit about the wing walking, I was like, I'm not sure I want to go quite that far. That's my idea of, yeah. But it was amazing just to think, actually, you're trying to capture a feeling, you're trying to capture an experience that opens things up for you in a way that just walking through, or going through your daily life, sometimes we just miss, and we miss the
We
opportunities
could
to
access
do.
it, but we miss the opportunity. And
Yeah.
nature just really is what they call an awe trigger, because it is awe inspiring. But it doesn't
Mm.
have to be the night sky or the Grand Canyon. That obviously is, or wing walking. Again, you just have to sort of be in the present moment more. And the crazy thing is that we live in a world of anti-awe devices. Our phone,
Yeah.
where we narrow our vision, we're not looking outward, and we feel very powerful in control. And that also is not an awe feeling, and also not a great feeling. They found
Mm.
that awe really, the reason you have a rise in gratitude and compassion is because you understand yourself more in relation to the outside world. And yeah, that's one of the other things awe gives you. Awe also gives you resilience. I hope you saw that part where
Mm.
it offers emotional resilience, because you tend to tell um, better stories about what has just happened when you are someone who is easily subsumed by awe. And in fact, the wing walker, Cynthia Hicks, who is 71, she had survived cancer. And so she had pulled back on a lot of her outdoor activities as she aged, but she never seemed to be sad about it. She was like, oh, I had 30 years of snowboarding. That was great. And now I had, 25 years of mountain biking, but I can't really do that anymore. So now I road cycle. I mean, she was the most grateful person I had ever met. She was full of gratitude about everything. So it was no
Wow.
wonder that she had found wing walking and led me to that inadvertently.
It's amazing, isn't it? Just that, yeah. It's so much of it comes down to how you frame the experience, and how you choose to see it, and revisit it, I guess, as well. I'm just wondering if someone's listening to this and they think, obviously we've touched on a whole range of different possible activities, but like you said, in the end, it's not necessarily about the activity itself, but about, the, the way in which you approach adventure, invite adventure into your lives as well. If someone's listening to this and they think, actually, I'd love to either start to live more adventurously, regardless of where I am in my life right now, or
Mhm.
I want to continue to do this as I age, as the years go by. I don't want to lose that part of me. I mean, what's the one piece of advice you would have for them?
Well, I think of Virginia Rose, the bird watcher who was in a wheelchair. She told me that, what does she say? She says, access your inner explorer, because she is your best self. So I think just leading with that curiosity and that exploratory mindset and that willingness to be exhilarated. I want to say one quick thing about fear, because it seems to come up a lot with women. So I wrote a book called The Gutsy Girl, because I was interested in the messaging that girls get, and that we give girls as we raise them. And it turns out that we raise our boys to embrace bravery, but we raise our girls to embrace fear. And we do that because we think it's going to protect them. If they're fearful of that dark alley, they won't walk into it. If they're fearful of that stranger, they won't talk to him. But in fact, if you lead with bravery, you learn all these skills like risk assessment and self-confidence and relying on your own decision making, because there's nothing more dangerous than relying on somebody else to make decisions for you. So I was really clear that we need girls to lead with bravery. But, I still encounter so many of my peers who bring up instantly, oh, going outside, what about, I'm so scared. Like that fear is something they talk about a lot when about going outside. And I just urge women in particular, because it is women, who to think of fear as just a side effect. It's like when you take a pharmaceutical and it's really good for you. And then you see the long list of side effects that include vomiting and diarrhea. Don't drive that tractor. Uh, Fear is just a side effect. It's one emotion and it's a red flag, and you should look at it. But you should never let it stop you, because most of the time we're so wrong about our fear. So once you look closely at it, you see that most of it is just murky and not relevant to the situation. But so think of it as something. Don't do anything like. Obviously, I'm not somebody who. Well, I have become someone who isn't somebody who's just reckless. I think you use your skills and you use your common sense, and you look at fear, and you don't want abject terror. But often fear and exhilaration feel very similar, and women can't really tell the difference. And so their heart starts to race. They sweat a little, and the hair stands up, and they're like, "Oh, I'm scared. I should just stop." And in fact, you might be feeling a lot of exhilaration, and that really means that you're about to have some, you know, experience that might open up your life, and you don't want to step back from that.
I absolutely love that. I was just thinking, and like you said, it's so ingrained from such an early age to avoid or to see the fear as a signal to stop. And actually that sort of almost that practice of leaning into it, or at least sort of sitting alongside it, and and allowing yourself to make those choices, sort of, not like you said, not paying attention to it, but going, okay, maybe this is, where is this coming from? What's driving this fear? And actually, maybe I can sit alongside it and do it anyway. And it can
what
still
is the real
exist.
fear? Like the
Yeah.
real
What is
fear is
it?
often like, oh, let's say, well, I at the end of the book, I went stand up paddling with one of my best friends, and we were going to try to find bioluminescence at night. And we play this game called the "What's the worst that could happen" game, because my friend Sophia tends to be someone who's like, oh my, her boundaries are different than mine. So I walk her through what's the worst that we can happen. And each time she says the worst, I point out, really, you think we're going to fall in the water? Okay, but we're attached to our stand-up paddleboard, so it's okay. We'll just clamber, and we have wetsuits. We'll clamber back on. Oh, we'll get lost in the dark. Yeah, we might. Well, that means we're going to sit on our boards for 8 hours, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But are we going to die? No. So we go through this where we really look closely at what we're afraid of. And usually it's just nothing. I mean, it turns out that we're not really afraid of anything specifically. We're just feeling fearful.
Mm. Yeah, I love this. Such powerful advice. It's brilliant. Caroline, that's been absolutely amazing. I could carry on this conversation probably for, for another hour. I'm conscious I probably should give you the rest of your day back. But if people want to find out more, if they want to get the book, if they want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go?
Well, the full title of the book is Tough Broad You'll probably say this in the beginning.
Yeah. That's all right. Say it anyway.
Tough Broad, from
everyone.
boogie boarding to wing walking, how outdoor adventure improves our lives as we age. And you can find it, I think it comes out in the UK in June.
In June. Okay, brilliant. So
yeah, June 19th, I think. I'm
fantastic.
Throwing it out there. And then I'm on Instagram, Caroline MB Paul, M as in Michael, B as in Bravo, Paul. Yeah.
Fantastic. And we'll pop all of those links in the show notes. So people.
Oh, and I have a website.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Caroline Paul. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure they're all linked so people can go straight out and find you. I believe you can also pre-order the book. Caroline, thank you again for your time. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. And
I love your podcast. Thank you.
No, it's been such a pleasure. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So once again, an enormous thank you to Caroline for coming on the show. It was such a pleasure speaking with her. I so enjoyed our conversation and got so much out of it personally, as well as noticing all the touch points in terms of the themes that we talk about in this podcast. I think the one point I'd like to touch on again this week, because we did speak about it in the podcast, was her point around how we internally frame. So obviously there's the external narratives around aging and societal narratives, but I think our own mindset towards aging, which is, I think, in many parts predetermined by the role models that we've had growing up and the way in which we've had it demonstrated to us what is possible through as we get older. Obviously, there's the aspect of being fortunate enough to have good health as we age, and therefore that enables us to take part in the activities and the adventures that we want to do. But I think there's also something around where we choose to focus our gaze. It reminds me a little bit about the portrait mode on, if you've got an iPhone, I don't know if it's the same on Android, but I'm assuming there's something similar. But how when you're in portrait mode, that you can focus on different aspects. You can focus on the foreground, you can focus on the background. Where do you choose to rest your gaze? And if we can find a gaze, or we can find a focus for our gaze that frames aging as something that is either positive or in some ways irrelevant, I think that can be so helpful in determining our own perspective. And when I mean irrelevant, clearly there are physical challenges that come with the aging process. I certainly recover a lot slower than I used to, even though in my head I think I'm clearly capable of far more. But I think it's about when we can see role models or people, I'm constantly amazed, particularly on a gorgeous morning here on the South Coast, and you get, if you're up at sort of 6:30, 7, you see people out running of all ages, of all shapes and sizes, the same as people in the water going out swimming. I've recently joined the Surf Lifesaving Club, and again, people of all ages, throwing themselves into it, literally throwing themselves into the sand. And it's such a joy to witness, and such an inspiration for me when I meet people who are either the same age or a bit older, or, I'm coming up to 50 next year. And when I meet people in their 50s and 60s who are, absolutely still going for it and still pushing and challenging themselves and do the things they love. I personally find that so inspiring, because it helps to remind me that when I'm having a moment of, oh God, look at that wrinkle, or oh God, I feel a bit crunchy, or I don't know if I should be doing this anymore, it sort of jolts me out of that. And so I guess I would encourage you to just have a think about where you're resting your gaze. And also caveated to that is I often find that it's harder to focus my gaze on those things that feel positive, inspiring, when I personally am drained and tired. Because sometimes then you can feel, well, how come everyone else can do it and I just want to go to bed? So I think there are two aspects. There's being generous and kind with yourself, and recognizing when you are low on energy and when you probably do need to rest, or when that narrative becomes really difficult to unhinge in a way. And then there's that noticing of who you choose to surround yourself with. What do you choose to take part in? Who do you allow to inspire you? And it's really interesting there to think about, actually, if I am feeling a bit closed down or a bit focused on how things are stopping rather than starting for me, I wonder what's going on there. I wonder what I can do to either acknowledge this, or even to maybe start to shift this, to tweak this, to think about changing it. Anyway, some thoughts I'm going to leave you with. I'd love to know what you think. As always, please do reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram, Everyday Adventure Pod, or Resilience at Work. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass. You can find me via my website, resiliencework.co.uk. Otherwise, I will be back again in a couple of weeks. We're motoring through the season now, and I'm also heading straight into the depths of the summer holidays, but I will do my best to keep my fortnightly promise to you, get the next episode out, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Take care. Bye.